Single dad took in a beaten woman without asking until he realized she was the CEO who ruined him. "If you're here to kill me," she whispered, "just don't let them take me back." The storm rolled in quiet like a lie. No thunder, no lightning, just a hush of wind sweeping over the high desert, stirring the dust and dead mesquite. It hadn't rained in weeks, but that night the clouds finally cracked open, and somewhere just south of nowhere in a weathered cabin outside of Las Cruces, New Mexico, Graham Walker tightened the last bolt on a sagging porch rail and glanced toward the dark. He wasn't expecting anyone. The school day had ended hours ago. His daughter Sophie was asleep inside with her nightlight on a tiny, flickering unicorn lamp that guarded her dreams ever since her mom died 3 years back. Graham never liked storms, not since Iraq. The kind of silence right before the downpour always made his gut tighten. Something about it felt off. Then came the knock. Not timid, not panicked, just deliberate. 1, 2, then nothing. He straightened, frowning, setting the wrench down. The lantern by his feet swayed with the wind. No vehicle lights on the long dirt road, no crunch of tires or footsteps, just the hiss of rainfall on sand and cedar. Graham walked slowly to the door. Hand brushing past the baseball bat he kept propped behind the coat rack, a habit from another life. He opened the door halfway, cautious. And there she was. A woman, barely standing. Hair matted to her face, soaked through and shivering in a shredded blouse that looked like it had been white once. Her lips were split. Mud crusted her elbows and the hem of a navy skirt that clung to her like a second skin. One shoe was missing. The other dangled from a foot caked in blood and gravel. She didn't speak right away, just stared at him like she'd already asked for help too many times in her life and learned it was pointless. And then came the whisper, "If you're here to kill me, just don't let them take me back." Graham didn't move. She swayed, then collapsed forward. He caught her before she hit the porch. Her body was light but dense with exhaustion. Up close he smelled blood rainwater and something deeper fear. Not panic, not adrenaline. A fear that had settled in, lived in her bones. He looked around again. Still no car, no one in sight. Only the wind and the sound of Sophie stirring inside. Graham lifted the woman in his arms carefully like she might break from too much kindness and carried her across the threshold. He laid her on the old leather couch in the front room, grabbing a blanket from the closet and an old flannel of his. He draped both over her before stoking the fire back to life. She was unconscious now, breathing shallow, fingers curled in defense, even asleep. He didn't ask questions, not yet. But he did take a picture, not for the police, not yet. Just in case she disappeared, in case someone came looking for her and lied. He didn't trust much anymore, and this had the smell of something more than just bad luck. He gently pulled the blanket aside and checked for wounds. No open gashes, but there were bruises. Deep ones, old ones. Some high on her arms, some beneath her ribs, and across her back, even through the soaked fabric, he saw them scars. Angry, deliberate scars. Not from accident, from intention. Graham stood breathing out hard through his nose. He'd seen things in the service, things men did to other men, to children, to women, but seeing it here in his home while his daughter slept just a few feet away. He went to the kitchen, grabbed the emergency med kit from above the fridge. Bandages, antiseptic, water. He didn't touch her skin, not without gloves, not without care. He cleaned around the wounds, checked for fever. Her wrists had raw, torn skin like she'd been bound. Every instinct in him screamed to pick up the phone, to call someone, sheriff, EMS, anyone. But something in her voice, that last look before she blacked out, just don't let them take me back. It wasn't a plea for safety. It was a final request from someone who'd already been abandoned too many times. He sat down in the old rocking chair near the fire, watched her face for any twitch of pain, watched the rise and fall of her chest. It wasn't until nearly 3 a.m. that she stirred. She sat up so fast the blanket fell off her shoulders, eyes wild and unfocused. She looked around like a hunted animal, then locked eyes with Graham. "You didn't touch me." It wasn't a question. He didn't answer. She looked down at the flannel at the warm room at the untouched glass of water. Why? Graham leaned forward, voice low and even. "Because I'm not like them." Her jaw clenched. Her shoulders tightened. Then, as if the words had weight she couldn't hold anymore, she collapsed back into the couch, fists clenched in her lap. "You should have left me." He didn't reply. Some things don't need arguing. Instead, he walked to the hallway and paused before turning back. "Blankets clean. Fire'll keep through the night. Bathroom second door on the left, and the door behind me." He pointed. "My daughter's asleep there. You're safe. Don't make me regret that." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with warmth, silence, and choices. The morning sun broke over the desert like it always did, quiet, slow, relentless. Light filtered through the blinds of Graham's cabin, brushing against wood-paneled walls, glinting off the kettle on the stove and settling on the woman still asleep on the couch. Graham had been up since 5. He'd already packed Sophie's lunch, fed the hens out back, and was now leaning against the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, watching her. She hadn't moved since the night before, but her breathing was steady now, deeper, less haunted. Sophie padded into the kitchen in her socks, rubbing her eyes, a pink backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. "Is the lady still here?" she asked softly. Graham nodded. "She's sleeping. Did she do something bad?" He took a sip of coffee. "I don't know yet." Sophie thought for a beat. "Can I leave her a drawing?" Graham looked at his daughter, all freckles and soft questions, and nodded again. "Yeah, sweetheart. That'd be nice." She ran off, and he turned back toward the couch. The woman stirred, then sat up slowly, cautiously, like her body was checking the room for permission to move. Her eyes found his. She blinked as if surprised he was still there. "I didn't dream it," she murmured, her voice raspy. "No," Graham said, his voice even. "You didn't." She looked down at the flannel draped around her shoulders, then back at him. "Thank you for not turning me in. I still might." He said, not cruel, just honest. "That depends on who you are and what's following you." She swallowed, looked around the room. The fire had burned down to embers. The air smelled like coffee and rain-wet wood. She seemed to take it all in like someone who hadn't seen normal in a long time. "I don't know if telling you is a good idea," she whispered. Graham stepped forward. "You're in my house. My daughter sleeps 10 feet from here. You don't get to keep secrets." She met his eyes, and something shifted. A flicker of resolve, the last remnants of whatever steel had once made up her spine. She opened her mouth to speak, and then stopped. Her gaze had landed on a photograph resting on a side shelf, a small, worn frame propped beside a jar of dried wildflowers. The photo showed a younger Graham dressed in army combat fatigues standing beside 3 other men, sand in their boots, fire in their eyes. One of those men wore a patch on his arm, cross-tech defense. She stood so suddenly the blanket fell from her shoulders. Graham didn't move. His hand flexed around his mug, his eyes narrowing. She took 2 slow steps toward the photo. This unit. "You served under Lieutenant Colonel Mendez." Graham's voice was quiet but hard-edged. "I did." She turned to him, her face draining of color. "I knew him," she whispered. I approved that deployment. The one in Anbar province. The gear test. That was my name on the contract." There was a silence then. Thick, unbreathable. Graham didn't speak, didn't blink. He set the mug down slowly, each motion deliberate. "You're Vivian Cross." It wasn't a question. She nodded once. He took a step back, jaw tight. "You're the reason Marcus Tiller's dead." Vivian flinched like he'd hit her. "I didn't know they used live teams," she said, the words spilling out now. "I flagged the specs. I told them the gear wasn't ready. The test was supposed to be unmanned. I fought. God, I fought so hard." "And then, what?" Graham snapped. Was it hard from the boardroom? She looked like she might break. He could see it the exact second her breath left her body, like she'd been shot. But Graham didn't care. He walked past her, gripping the edge of the sink, breathing slow and tight. Sophie's voice broke the silence. "Daddy." He turned. She was standing in the hallway holding a folded piece of paper with crayon smudges on her fingers. Vivian stepped back, almost hiding herself. But Sophie walked right up to her and held out the drawing. A stick-figure family stood beneath a crooked sun. One tall figure, one short, and one in the middle with long, swooping yellow hair. "I drew us," Sophie said. "I don't know your name, but you look sad. So I made the sun extra big." Vivian stared at the drawing like it was a foreign language. Her hands trembled as she took it. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, and Graham saw something strange, not fear, not pride, but grief. Deep, crumbling, the kind that doesn't cry, it folds. Sophie turned and ran back to her room. Vivian's voice was barely audible. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt." Graham looked at her. For the first time, not as a CEO, not as the woman whose signature signed off the chain that got his friend killed, but as someone broken, unprotected, alone. And yet, she'd said his name. She remembered the lieutenant. She remembered the contract. That wasn't something you could fake. "What happened to you?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. Then, with a breath that seemed to drain her completely, she whispered, "They tried to kill me. I got too close to the wrong numbers. Financial reports didn't match. Someone was bleeding money out of Crosstech. I tried to report it, and suddenly I was the problem." She looked down at her wrists, still red from the bindings. "They said I stole company assets, that I was unstable. I got discredited overnight. Then the car crash. Except it wasn't an accident." Her voice cracked. "I survived, but I couldn't go to the cops. They own them. I ran, for weeks, until I couldn't run anymore." Graham crossed his arms. "And you came here." "Why?" She met his gaze. "I didn't know this was your home. I didn't even know who you were until I saw that photo. Then how'd you find me?" She blinked. "I didn't." She pulled something from her pocket, a folded paper half-torn, water-damaged. It was a flyer from the school, a list of emergency contact volunteers. And there it was, typed in faded ink, at the bottom, Graham Walker, Facilities and Maintenance Supervisor. I took it from a school desk. I was just looking for somewhere small, quiet, where no one would ask. Silence fell again, but this time it didn't press down on them like a weight. It settled gently, like a decision waiting to be made. Graham looked at the woman before him. Vivian Cross, the ghost from his past, standing barefoot in his flannel holding his daughter's drawing with trembling fingers. He didn't forgive her, not yet, but something had shifted. Not in his gut, not in his fists, in his eyes. "You'll stay in the spare room," he said finally, "until I figure out what to do with you." Vivian let out a breath like it was the first real exhale in months. "Thank you." Graham shook his head. "Don't thank me yet." Then he turned back toward the hallway. But his voice trailed behind him like a shadow. "Because if any of this puts my daughter at risk, you're not the only one who knows how to disappear." The spare room hadn't been touched in over a year. Graham opened the door with the same care he used to handle old explosives, slow, deliberate eyes watching for anything that might collapse. The air was stale, edged with cedar and dust. A twin bed sat in the corner, its quilt folded military style. The window overlooked the east ridge where the morning sun always hit first. Vivian stood behind him silent. "I cleaned it last winter," he said, almost apologetically. "But no one stayed here since my brother visited." She nodded. Her hands were wrapped tight around Sophie's drawing. The stick figure family crumpled slightly in her grip like she didn't know she was holding it so hard. "You can shower," Graham added. "Fresh towels in the cabinet. Door locks from the inside." That last part wasn't just information, it was reassurance. Vivian looked up. "And if I don't come out?" He didn't blink. "Then I knock once. And if I hear nothing after that, I wait." A beat passed. Then, so quiet he almost didn't hear it, she said, "That's the first time someone's asked." Graham stepped back to give her space. "The hot water's touchy. Let it run for a minute." Vivian nodded again and disappeared behind the door. He listened for a moment, just the soft creak of the old floorboards, then the click of the lock. And only then did Graham allow himself to exhale. The sounds of water running through copper pipes echoed down the hallway like rain in a canyon. Graham stood at the kitchen sink, his knuckles white on the edge of the counter. She was here. Vivian Cross. The woman whose name he'd sworn never to speak out loud again. The woman who'd haunted every one of his regrets. She wasn't a villain in his eyes, at least not anymore, but she wasn't a ghost either. Not now. She was flesh and blood, hurt, vulnerable, and upstairs in his house. And damn it, that made everything harder. He didn't realize how long he'd been gripping the sink until he heard her voice again, barely audible, floating down the hall. Graham. He walked back to the hallway. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a towel, damp hair clinging to her neck. Her skin looked fragile in the light, bruised in places pink in others, but clean. Finally, clean. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. Not yet. My shoulder. It's infected, I think she said. I didn't know how to look at it. Graham gave a tight nod. Sit down. I'll grab the med kit. He laid the supplies out on the old coffee table in front of her. Alcohol, gauze, antibiotic ointment, cotton pads, latex gloves. She sat stiffly on the edge of the couch towel clutched around her torso, her breathing shallow. He moved slowly. You okay if I touch you? She nodded once. No eye contact. But she didn't flinch when he peeled back the towel from her shoulder. What he saw made his stomach turn. A shallow cut, jagged probably from a blunt blade. It had started to scab but was surrounded by red inflamed tissue. Infection had set in days ago. Someone had tried to hurt her. Not fast, not efficient, just intentionally. He cleaned it in silence. She didn't wince, didn't move, but her lips pressed together so tightly they turned white. I've seen a lot of wounds, Graham said, his voice low. But the ones that stay with you are the ones made slow. She didn't respond. He bandaged it carefully, then pulled the blanket back over her shoulder. You'll need antibiotics, he said. I've got some left over from Sophie's bronchitis, but we'll get you to a clinic soon. I can't show my face, she murmured. You won't have to, he replied. There's a vet 2 towns over, owes me a favor. Discreet, no questions. Vivian let out a bitter laugh. A vet? Animals get hurt too, he said. Pain's the same in any species. She was quiet for a long moment. And then, do you think I deserve this? Graham didn't answer right away. He took off the gloves, dropped them in the trash, and sat down across from her. No, he said. I think the people who did this to you deserve worse. Vivian swallowed hard. But that doesn't mean I've forgotten, he added. I don't expect you to. He studied her face. The shadows beneath her eyes, the way her fingers kept tugging at the blanket like she needed something to hold on to. What happened to you after you disappeared? Her voice was a rasp. They froze my accounts. Locked every digital trail. Claimed I had a psychotic break. Even sent a press release to the board claiming I'd falsified reports. The story held. I had no family left to fight for me. No one asked questions. And the car crash. She nodded. Brake line was cut. I blacked out, woke up in a drainage ditch. Shoulder dislocated, rib cracked. I crawled through desert scrub 5 miles to the nearest gas station. He said nothing, just listened. I couldn't go to a hospital. I knew someone would finish what they started. So I ran. Shelter to shelter, changed my name, burned IDs. And every night I asked myself if it would have been easier to just... She trailed off. The words didn't need to be finished. Graham looked at her steady. You didn't, he said. That matters. Vivian's lips trembled. I wanted to, but you didn't. She looked down, gripping Sophie's drawing again. Why are you being kind to me? He thought about that for a long time. And then, in the same tone he used when Sophie scraped her knee or asked why her mom wasn't coming back, he said, Because this world's already got too many people who look away. That night the cabin felt warmer. Sophie danced barefoot through the living room giggling as she played with the stray dog Graham hadn't yet named. Vivian sat on the couch, her shoulder now properly wrapped, sipping soup. She laughed once quietly when Sophie made a joke about naming the dog Pickle. Graham just watched. Watched as a woman once torn to pieces by men in suits sat under his roof and started slowly to come back to life. And he couldn't explain it. He didn't try, but he felt something in his chest shift. Just a little. Like maybe, just maybe this wasn't a ghost after all. Maybe this was someone who had crawled out of hell with scars and still had the nerve to say she wanted to try again, and maybe that not survival was the bravest damned thing he'd ever seen. The fire crackled low in the hearth shadows, flickering like ghosts on the cabin walls. Outside, the desert wind howled across the open plain, lifting sand and memory in equal measure. Inside, it was warm, not just in temperature, but in the way silence no longer carried the same weight it used to. Vivian sat curled on the armchair by the window, her bandaged shoulder peeking from beneath one of Graham's flannel shirts. She hadn't said much that morning. Just helped wash the dishes after breakfast, listened to Sophie chatter about her school art project, then quietly drifted toward the window like she was waiting for the past to catch up. Graham noticed the shift. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't survival. It was something else, something slower, quieter, like grief finding its final form not in collapse but in clarity. He watched her from the kitchen, arms crossed over his chest. "You remember anything else?" he asked. She didn't turn. Not all at once, she said. Just flashes. Of what? Vivian ran her finger along the frosted window pane. Boardroom arguments. Phone calls that went silent too fast. The night I confronted Holloway. Graham's jaw tightened at that name. He didn't interrupt. I told him the procurement numbers didn't make sense, she continued. We were ordering double, triple, equipment that didn't exist, test fields that weren't accounted for. He smiled like I'd passed a test he didn't think I'd take. She paused. That same night, my office keycard stopped working. Graham's voice was gravel. And you still stayed. She looked at him now finally. I stayed because I thought truth mattered. He nodded slowly. And? She smiled, but it was bitter. Turns out, truth only matters to the people willing to lose everything for it. He walked over and set a fresh cup of coffee beside her. You did lose everything. Vivian wrapped her hands around the mug. Not everything. Not yet. There was a beat of silence between them. Not awkward, not tense, just full of things neither one knew how to say. I used to think, Graham said, finally breaking it, that the hardest part of war was what happened there. But it's not. It's what comes back with you, and what you come back to. Vivian met his eyes. What did you come back to? Graham didn't answer right away. He turned toward the fireplace and stirred the embers with the iron poker. My wife died 3 months after I got home. Car accident. Sophie was 4. I buried her, packed up everything we had, and moved out here. Started over, if you can call it that. Vivian's voice softened. I'm sorry, he shrugged. I don't need sorry, just facts. And the fact is, you're the first person who's walked through that door in 3 years without needing plumbing or a shovel. She almost smiled. Almost. I used to think, she whispered, that people like me didn't break, that our edges bent sure but never cracked. I used to think strength was pretending. Graham turned to face her, and now, she looked down at her coffee. Now I think the strongest thing a person can do is not pretend, is look someone in the eye and say, I'm not okay, but I still showed up. He watched her for a long moment, then nodded. That's something I can respect. Later that evening, Sophie insisted on making dinner, which meant scrambled eggs, toast, slightly burnt, and apple slices arranged in the shape of smiley faces. Vivian laughed for the first time in front of Graham, real and unrehearsed, when Sophie held up a piece of toast with jam eyes and said, This one's you, Daddy, because the nose is crooked. Graham feigned insult. I served 2 tours, fixed 20 broken toilets, but that is what I get. Vivian grinned. She's not wrong. They ate around the small table in the kitchen. The light above them was warm, casting soft shadows. Vivian sat with her legs tucked beneath her, her arm occasionally brushing Graham's as they passed plates. Nothing was said about it, but something lived in that silence, some new thread being quietly woven. After Sophie was asleep, Vivian stepped out onto the porch. Graham found her standing at the railing wrapped in an old blanket, eyes fixed on the stars. "You can see more out here," she said. "In the city, it was all concrete and noise. But this feels like truth." He joined her arms crossed. "They say the desert doesn't hide anything," he murmured. "Just waits for you to stop pretending." Vivian looked over at him, her voice low. "You ever stop pretending?" Once he said. "Didn't go well." She leaned on the post, head tilted. "I used to see myself as a fighter, one of the only women in a room full of men twice my age trying to convince them I belonged. I wore heels, tailored suits, thick skin." She paused. "I forgot somewhere along the way that skin still bleeds." Graham glanced at her. "You didn't forget. You just believed it wouldn't be yours." Vivian swallowed. "And now you know." She looked at him, eyes glinting in the moonlight. "I'm not the same woman who walked into that office 2 years ago." "No," he said. "You're not." Vivian turned fully toward him. "So, who am I now?" Graham met her gaze. Steady, calm. "You're the woman who didn't die." "That's a start." And with those words, something settled between them, not romance, not yet. But respect, and something like reverence. Not for who they were, but for the versions of themselves they were finally becoming. Inside the house, an old cassette player clicked on Sophie had forgotten to turn off her bedtime story tape. Graham stepped in to switch it off, and as he did, a familiar tune drifted out. And when the dark tries to swallow you whole, you remember the fire that made you. Vivian stood in the doorway listening. "I know this song," she said, surprised. "My mom used to hum it." Graham raised a brow. "Sophie's favorite. She thinks it's a lullaby." Vivian smiled. "It is. And a promise." He looked at her again. Something unspoken passed between them. Then she whispered, "Maybe I still have some fire left." And, for the first time since she showed up on his porch barefoot and bleeding, Graham believed it. Some pain doesn't scream. It whispers. Quiet. Patient. It waits beneath the skin like a fire that never got the chance to burn out. And some mornings that's what Graham saw when he looked at Vivian Cross. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her back to him, still wearing his oversized flannel shirt, one sleeve rolled up to avoid the fresh bandage he'd changed earlier. Her coffee had gone cold. She hadn't touched the toast Sophie left on the plate. Graham leaned against the doorway, arms folded. He didn't say anything. Not yet. Vivian's fingers traced circles on the rim of the mug, eyes unfocused. "I had a dream last night," she said softly. "I was back in the Crosstech boardroom. Everyone's faces blurred except one. Holloway." Graham didn't move. I kept asking him why. Why the lies, the sabotage, the contracts? He just smiled and said, "Because you let me." She looked up at Graham. That's the part that stuck. "You let me." Graham stepped into the room and sat across from her. The wood of the chair creaked beneath his weight. "You think that's true?" he asked. She let out a bitter breath. "I don't know. Maybe I should have pushed harder, left earlier, screamed louder." "No one hears a scream from behind a glass wall," he said quietly. Vivian blinked, startled by the weight in his voice. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Let me show you something." Graham pulled an old wooden box from the cabinet. Inside were medals, papers, faded photographs, and a small folded flag. He laid one item on the table, a printed after-action report from 2016. Half redacted. Government issue font. Cold. Clean. Vivian stared at it like it might explode. He tapped a paragraph near the bottom, highlighted in yellow. Malfunction during test deployment. Equipment failed under live fire. Resulted in 3 fatalities, 2 critical injuries. Prototype was Crosstech Series 4C. Contract fast-tracked. Oversight waivers signed by... Her eyes froze on the line beneath. Her name. Vivian Cross. Her breath hitched. This is the incident in Fallujah." Graham nodded. "Marcus Tiller, Evan Hahn, Diego King. All good men, all gone." Her voice broke. "I never approved live deployment. I told them the equipment wasn't ready. The 4Cs hadn't passed heat stress tests. Didn't matter. Graham said. "Your name was on the waiver. That's what stayed with me." Vivian reached for the paper with trembling hands, reading it again like maybe this time the truth would change. "Marcus had a daughter," Graham said after a pause. "Same age as Sophie. She never got to say goodbye." Vivian looked up, tears welling in her eyes. "I was trying to save lives, and someone made you the villain for it." She nodded slowly. "They buried the investigation, falsified timelines, and I was complicit by ignorance." "You weren't ignorant," Graham said. "You were outnumbered." She swallowed hard. "You think that changes anything?" she whispered. "I think," he said carefully, "it makes you human." Later that day, Graham stepped out to check the livestock pen behind the cabin. The late autumn wind had picked up dry and sharp. He adjusted the latch on the chicken coop and looked out over the ridge. Clouds were rolling in again. When he came back inside, he found Vivian in the hallway mirror staring at her reflection like it was someone else's face. Her sleeves were pushed up. On the inside of her left forearm, faint but unmistakable, were the raised white lines of an old branding mark. A word. Worthless. Graham froze. Vivian caught his reflection in the mirror but didn't flinch. "You want to ask," she said. "I don't have the right." She turned slowly to face him. "They didn't just want me gone," she said. "They wanted me erased." She gestured to the scar. "They made sure I remembered what they thought of me." Graham stepped closer, voice low. "That scar says more about them than it ever will about you." Vivian laughed, but it cracked. "Tell that to my nightmares." He hesitated, then reached forward not to touch but to show his own forearm. A long scar ran along the muscle, jagged and pale. "Roadside IED," he said. "I carried a man bleeding out back to the Humvee. Shrapnel caught me. They gave me a medal I never asked for and sent me home with a limp and no job." Vivian stared at the scar. "You kept walking," she said. He nodded. "So did you." They stood in silence, not out of awkwardness, but because some truths don't need commentary, only acknowledgement. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Vivian stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. Graham dried. The rhythm between them had become second nature. "You're not afraid of me," she said suddenly. He looked at her, startled. She didn't look away. "Most men wouldn't have let me stay. Most wouldn't have believed me." Graham folded the towel slowly. "I don't care what most men would have done. I only care what's right. And you think this is right?" He nodded. "I think truth deserves a place to heal." Vivian smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'm finally in the right place." Graham didn't say it aloud, but deep down something in him agreed. As the fire dwindled in the hearth and the desert wind howled outside, Graham sat alone in the living room after she went to bed. He looked at the after-action report one more time, then quietly, deliberately. He burned it, because sometimes the past isn't meant to be carried, it's meant to be released. And, for the first time in years, Graham Walker let go of the man who had come home angry, broken, and convinced that healing was for someone else. That night, he finally understood scars don't mean you're weak. They mean you survived. Some people return to the world loud, demanding it see them. Others return quiet, determined to earn their place back one small, deliberate act at a time. Vivian Cross was the second kind. It started with the dishes. No announcement, no explanation. One morning, Graham walked into the kitchen and saw her scrubbing the frying pan with a kind of focus that suggested she wasn't just cleaning, she was claiming. Reclaiming agency, dignity space. He didn't interrupt, just handed her a clean towel and poured 2 mugs of coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. The next day, she fed the hens. By the end of the week, she was up before Graham boiling water for tea and reorganizing the spice shelf. The quiet hum of routine replaced the once frozen silence in the cabin like a house slowly remembering what it meant to be lived in. But it was in the smallest moments, those unspoken in-between seconds, that Graham noticed the real shift. Vivian laughed more. It wasn't loud or constant, but it was real. Her posture changed. The way she looked at Sophie softened from wary admiration to something warmer, maternal maybe. And when Graham walked into a room, she no longer stiffened. She stayed. One evening, while the sunset painted the horizon in smears of gold and wine, Graham sat on the porch sanding down a wooden beam for the chicken coop. Vivian stepped out holding 2 glasses of iced tea. She handed him one without a word and took the seat beside him, tucking her legs beneath her. He nodded toward the horizon. "You did all this today," she sipped. "Just the pantry and a few closets. Organized your tools by function, not color." He smiled faintly. "You think I organized by color? I saw a row of hammers next to a paintbrush and a flashlight. That's chaos." He shrugged. "Or creative strategy." Vivian tilted her head. "Or a man who's too stubborn to admit he just throws things in drawers." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then she asked, "What did you do before this?" Graham set the sandpaper down. "Before here? Army. Maintenance unit. Then I bounced around construction jobs until I landed the school gig." "You like it? I like fixing things," he said. "They break, you mend them. They squeak, you oil them. Simple problems. Honest work." Vivian looked down at her hands. "I used to think fixing things meant holding meetings, writing memos, firing people who didn't match the metrics. Turns out, I wasn't fixing anything. I was just moving pieces while the foundation cracked beneath us." Graham turned to her. "Maybe now you get to fix something real." She glanced over. "You think I can—" "You're already doing it," he said simply. She didn't respond right away, but the look in her eyes wasn't haunted anymore. It was hopeful. The next morning, Vivian took Sophie to school with Graham. She wore jeans for the first time since arriving. Her hair, though still tousled from recovery, was pulled back in a low, simple ponytail. Graham watched from the truck as Sophie chattered away, holding her hand, guiding her through the front office. Vivian stood back while Graham signed the attendance sheet and dropped off Sophie's project. She didn't speak much, but she watched, eyes sharp, scanning every interaction, absorbing the culture of this small-town school like it was a foreign country she needed to learn the language of. On the drive back, she finally said, "That principal, she's strong." Graham raised a brow. "Mrs. Langston?" "Yeah. Took over last year. Runs the place like a submarine captain. I like her. She's the reason I have this job. Didn't care what I did before. Said, 'You fix things great. Kids break a lot of stuff.' Hired me on the spot." Vivian nodded, her eyes distant. "You ever think, maybe the world needs more Mrs. Langstons and less CEOs?" Graham smirked. "Thought you were a CEO." She gave him a look. "I was. Doesn't mean I should have been." He glanced at her. "Maybe being in charge isn't about knowing everything. Maybe it's about being the first to say, 'I'll take the fall if this goes south.'" Vivian exhaled. "And I didn't." "You're doing it now," Graham said. "That counts more than people think." That afternoon, Vivian walked out to the barn with a clipboard and a half-empty coffee mug. Graham was fixing a corroded hinge on the storage shed door when she held up the list. "I inventoried your tools. You're missing 3 wrench heads and you have 2 screwdrivers you really don't need." He blinked. "How do you know what I need?" "You have 6, she said. "No one needs 6 screwdrivers." "I might." "Do you?" "Not the point." She grinned. And for a moment she looked like a woman who had never been hunted, never been branded, never been broken. Just a woman alive, sharp present. "I also made a meal plan for the week," she added. "Nothing fancy, just efficient." He leaned on the shed frame. Vivian Cross, building systems out of scrambled eggs and rusted hinges. She looked him square in the eye. "You're not the only one who fixes things, Graham." There it was again. That shift. That fire, not blinding, but steady, burning clean. That evening, after Sophie went to bed, Vivian sat by the fire journal in hand. Graham passed her a cup of tea and sat across from her, resting his arms on his knees. "I used to keep lists," she said. "Tasks, deadlines, performance metrics. I had a planner that weighed more than my purse, and now I make lists of people I want to thank. If I ever get my life back." Graham stared at the flames. "What's the first thing you'd do if it all ended tomorrow? The hiding, the threats, if you were free?" Vivian paused. Then, quietly, "I'd sit in a room full of people I used to lead. And I'd say I'm sorry I wasn't braver when it mattered. Graham looked at her. You are now. I wasn't then. He nodded. None of us are brave all the time. She smiled, small and sad. Do you think they'd listen? Graham took a breath. Sometimes people don't need the old version of you to apologize. They just need to see the new one. Show up. Vivian turned her gaze to the fire, then whispered, Then maybe it's time I sat at the table again. And, for the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't say it with doubt. She said it like a woman who meant it. Trouble never knocked in the desert. It didn't call ahead or ring the bell. Out here, it just showed up quiet still and watching. Sometimes it wore dust like armor. Sometimes it rode a silent engine and stared from the edge of the world. And that morning it stood on the ridge behind Graham's property waiting. Graham spotted the figure just after sunrise. He'd stepped out to check the fence line, coffee in hand, when a flicker of motion caught his eye near the high ridge overlooking the property. A silhouette. Broad shoulders, cowboy hat. Still as a stone. Too still. Too early for hikers. Too off-trail for tourists. And no one local stood that straight unless they were military or trained to be. He didn't wave, didn't blink. Just stood there, mug cooling in his grip, reading the tension in the man's posture like a warning. By the time he turned back inside, his gut was already twisted tight. Vivian was at the table with Sophie helping her spell tomorrow for a science poster. She smiled when Graham walked in. That smile faded the moment she saw his face. Someone's watching the house, he said flatly. She went still. Where? Up on the ridge. Tall, lean, might be scouting, might be sending a message. Vivian's eyes darted toward the window. Did you recognize him? No. But he wasn't hiding. He wanted to be seen. Sophie looked between them. Is something wrong? Vivian turned to her, instantly softening. Nothing you need to worry about, honey. But Graham could see it in her eyes, the same terror he'd seen when she first showed up at his door barefoot and shaking. Only this time it wasn't panic. It was fight or flight. I need you to take Sophie to school, she said to Graham, rising from her seat. You're not going anywhere alone. She didn't argue, just walked to her room and came back 5 minutes later wearing jeans, boots, and a jacket zipped up to her chin. Her hair was tied back. Her face had changed not in fear, but in focus. This was the version of her that had once walked into boardrooms with men who wanted her silent and made them listen anyway. I don't know how they found me, she said quietly as they got into the truck, but they're not just here to watch. They're testing. Testing what if I'll run. Graham glanced at her. Will you? She looked back at him, her jaw set like iron. Not this time. That afternoon, Graham walked the perimeter of the ranch twice. Nothing. No footprints, no vehicles, no sign of a camp. The man on the ridge was gone for now. When he got back inside, Vivian was at the kitchen table. In front of her lay 3 things, a burner phone, a thumb drive, and a small notebook with names scribbled down in tidy columns. What is all this insurance? She said, not looking up. I kept her records. Not everything made it out, but enough. Enough to burn them down if needed. Graham sat across from her. Why haven't you turned it in? To who, she asked. Feds. I went that route once. They buried it. I send this now and they'll kill me before it gets read. You think they're watching the mail? I think they're watching everything. He was quiet for a moment. Then, so what's your plan? Vivian's eyes flicked toward the door. We make them come to us. He shook his head. You don't need a war, Vivian. I don't, she agreed. But I need the truth to matter. And if I have to put myself on the line again, I'll do it. I want to do it right this time. She looked at him then, full on. Her eyes weren't glassy or soft. They were sharp, alive, purposeful. I'm not that woman they broke, not anymore. And Graham believed her. That night the knock didn't come, but a letter did. Slid beneath the front door in silence sometime after midnight. The paper was thin, folded once. Inside, in precise block lettering, were 4 chilling words. We know she's here. No name, no logo, just a symbol scrawled in red ink. A wolf's head circled in flame. Vivian went white when she saw it. Graham knew better than to ask why. He recognized a signature when he saw one. This was a calling card. You've seen it before, he asked. She nodded. Private security firm. Off books. Used by Holloway for cleanup. What kind of cleanup? Her voice dropped to a whisper. The permanent kind. Graham picked up the note with the tongs and dropped it into the fire. The flames licked it clean in seconds. He turned to her. We need to call someone. She shook her head. Not yet. Not until we know who's coming and how close they are. You're not alone this time, Vivian. She looked at him, breath-catching. That's the part that scares them. The following morning, Graham made a call. Not to the police, but to someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Ben Keller, a retired military buddy now working security in Tucson. Trusted, discreet. Ben didn't ask many questions. Just one. You need eyes or firepower. Graham's reply was cold and clear. Eyes first. Firepower if they don't blink. By dusk, Ben had sent a drone and 2 spotters in plain vehicles to scout the perimeter. Graham kept Sophie indoors. He didn't tell her why. Vivian stayed by the window watching the hills like a soldier waiting for the ambush she knew would come. Do you regret staying? Graham asked that night. Vivian didn't answer right away. Then she said, There's something worse than dying, Graham. It's being erased. I won't let them finish what they started. He nodded slowly. Then, neither will I. She looked at him, searching his face. You know you don't owe me this, right? He stepped closer. I know. That's what makes it real. Vivian blinked hard, turning away. But not before he saw it, the shimmer in her eyes. Not fear, not sorrow, gratitude. Quiet, raw, and maybe the beginning of something bigger. At midnight, the man returned. Same ridge, same stance. But this time he wasn't alone. 3 silhouettes flanked him, distant but deliberate. They didn't move, didn't wave, just watched. Graham stood on the porch, shotgun in hand, silent. Beside him, Vivian stepped out. She didn't hide, didn't shake. She just looked them dead in the eye. Let them look, she whispered, because the next time they come close, I'll be ready. And Graham knew in the marrow of his bones, so would he. The desert had a way of holding its breath. At night, it fell so still even the coyotes seemed to whisper. That kind of silence didn't comfort Graham, it warned him. The kind that said something's coming, but not yet, like the world was bracing. Inside the cabin, the fire popped once, throwing a brief light against the window. Graham sat at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on the small black USB drive that rested between him and Vivian like a lit fuse. She hadn't touched it in days, hadn't mentioned it since the second man showed up on the ridge. But now her hands were steady. I need you to understand, she said, her voice low. This isn't just names or files. This is everything. Every contract Crosstech buried. Every off-book transaction. Every favor called in from D.C. to Dubai. Graham didn't blink. And your name's all over it. Vivian nodded. Every page. He leaned back. That's enough to bury you. Her jaw tightened. Or to bury them. She reached forward, sliding the drive across the table. It tapped his fingers, once light metallic, and stopped. I made copies, she said. 2 stored offline. But this is the master. The one I took from Holloway's private server the night before they tried to kill me. Graham exhaled through his nose. Hell of a souvenir. Vivian smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's not a trophy. It's a weapon. And if we use it wrong, we don't just bring them down, we set the whole forest on fire. He turned the drive over in his hand. Then we aim it right. The plan came together in whispers. Ben Keller, Graham's old army buddy, had a contact inside a whistleblower foundation in New Mexico. Not the government, not law enforcement. Independent, secure, and best of all, silent. They didn't make headlines. They made cases. Ironclad ones. Vivian agreed to a meet. Ben would drive her to the safe house. Graham would stay with Sophie. No phones, no tail, one shot. But the weight of the decision pressed on them for hours before dawn. On the porch, under a moon barely showing its face, Vivian asked the question that had been chewing at her for days. Do you think I'm doing this because I believe in justice? Or because I want revenge? Graham looked at her for a long time. Does it matter? She hesitated. It does to me. He nodded, slow. Then ask yourself this when it's over. If they all fall, if your name's cleared, if you get your life back, will that be enough? Vivian didn't answer, because she didn't know, and that truth, that aching, uncertain truth, sat between them like a ghost neither of them could exorcise. Sophie woke early the next morning. Too early. She came into the kitchen still wrapped in her blanket, clutching her sketchbook. Vivian poured her a glass of juice. Couldn't sleep. Sophie nodded. Bad dream. Want to tell me about it? She shrugged. It was about you. You were standing in front of fire. Not like burning, but like the fire wanted to take you, and you just stood there. Vivian froze the juice carton in her hand, trembling. Graham stepped in, eyes sharp. Then, what Sophie smiled faintly. You didn't run. The fire got tired and left. Vivian sat down slowly. Sometimes it took a child to say the thing adults were too scared to believe. That endurance beats evil. Not violence, not rage, just staying. She reached over and ran a hand through Sophie's hair. Thanks, kiddo. That might be the best dream I've ever heard. By midday, Ben arrived, a dust-covered pickup pulling into the gravel drive like it belonged there. Vivian was packed. Nothing more than a backpack with a change of clothes and the drive. She hugged Sophie longer than expected, whispered something in her ear that made the girl's eyes well up. Then she turned to Graham. She hesitated for a second, just a second, then wrapped her arms around his neck. Don't let them scare you, she whispered. They'll try. He pulled back, hands firm on her shoulders. You stay safe. You come back. I will, she said. But if I don't... You will, he repeated, and this time he meant it. She climbed into the truck and they pulled away. Tires crunching gravel, then fading into nothing. The cabin felt colder the moment she left. That night, Graham couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire listening for anything movement, breathing ghosts. But the desert was too quiet. Until it wasn't. At 3:27 a.m., the door rattled once. Not a knock, not a kick, just the subtle whisper of metal against wood. Graham stood slowly, shotgun in hand. He opened the door. Nothing. No man, no figure, just the dark. But taped to the porch post was another note. 3 words. She's not enough. And below it, a bullet. Clean. Unfired. But etched with the word Walker. Graham stared at it, jaw locked. They weren't watching anymore. They were warning. Vivian arrived at the safe house by noon the next day. Ben stayed with her through the initial debrief, then made the call back to Graham. She made it, he said. They're verifying the files now. If half of what she gave them checks out, it'll shake bones in 3 states. Graham didn't say much, just looked at the bullet on his table. Ben paused. They're not going to take this lying down. You know that, right? I do. You ready for what comes next? Graham's voice was quiet, sure. I've been ready since the day she showed up on my porch. Ben was silent for a long beat, then said, You're a better man than I ever was. No, Graham said. I just stopped looking away. That night, Graham told Sophie they might take a little trip soon. Maybe stay at Ben's for a bit. Maybe somewhere further, just in case. Sophie nodded, eyes wise beyond her years. Because of the fire, he blinked. What? In the dream, she said. The fire went away, but only because you stood next to her. Graham swallowed. Yeah, honey. That's why. She curled into his side and whispered, Then don't leave her alone. He looked out the window toward the desert, toward the ridge where shadows once stood, and he made a promise not just to her, not just to Vivian, but to the man he was becoming. I won't, because the past had come back, and now so had they. 3 weeks passed. The air grew colder, the sunsets longer. The cabin settled into a new, quiet rhythm, but the tension never left. It lived in the space between heartbeats. It lived in the way Graham kept his shotgun oiled and the way Vivian still woke up at the slightest sound. Some battles don't start with a gunshot. They start with a flickering porch light, a shift in the air, a silence that falls too still. Graham felt at first a chill that crawled up the back of his neck at 1:17 a.m. as he lay half awake listening to the wind. Except it wasn't the wind. It was something slower, creepier, measured. Down the hall, Sophie's soft breathing rose and fell in her room. Safe, peaceful. Graham sat up, didn't reach for his phone. He reached for the shotgun beneath the bed frame, the same one he hadn't fired in years but cleaned every Friday like ritual. He moved through the hallway without a sound, bare feet practiced in old habits. Then he saw it, the back door ajar, not wide, just enough for someone trained to know how to slip through without a creak. He could smell the dust from boots that didn't belong, and when he rounded the corner he saw the silhouette tall-gloved black jacket head covered rifling through drawers like he owned the place. Graham didn't hesitate. "Wrong house?" he growled. The man spun, knife out, not a gun. Graham ducked the slash, slammed the butt of the shotgun into the man's ribs, and twisted his wrist hard enough to send the blade clattering across the tile. But there was a second shadow. From behind a flash of motion, and Graham was hit hard across the back of the head. A blinding flash of pain exploded at the back of his head. He went down to one knee, the cabin's familiar outline blurring and tilting. A boot landed in his ribs. He didn't feel pain. He felt purpose. He grabbed the man's leg mid-swing and yanked, sending him crashing to the floor. The first intruder lunged for the kitchen door. "Where's the drive?" he barked. Graham didn't answer, because from the hallway came another sound, the sound that froze his blood faster than anything else. Sophie, whispering, "Daddy." His head turned. So did theirs, and that half-second was enough. Vivian moved like a shadow out of the dark metal fire poker in both hands and struck the nearest man in the temple with a crack that echoed through the house. He dropped. The second one turned just in time to catch a face full of pepper spray from Graham, quick, brutal, blinding. Then the butt of the shotgun. Again. Again. The man crumpled. Silence, except for breathing. Heavy. Shaking. Vivian turned to Sophie, who stood frozen in the hall, pajama-clad, eyes wide. "Sweetheart, come here. Come now." Graham reached out and pulled his daughter into his arms, cradling the back of her head. She trembled against his chest. Vivian checked the men. Both alive. One unconscious, one groaning. "They didn't come to warn us," she whispered. "They came to take it." Graham's voice was low, dark, steel beneath gravel. They crossed the line. They tied the men with zip ties Graham kept in the shed. Hands, ankles, mouths taped shut. Vivian knelt beside the one still semi-conscious. "You work for Holloway?" she asked. He said nothing. She pulled the tape from his mouth. He spat blood. "You don't scare us, lady." Vivian leaned in, voice steady. "Good. Then you won't mind me telling the world what you tried to do to a child." The man's jaw tensed. But he didn't speak again. By the time Ben arrived 40 minutes later, alerted through a panic signal Graham had hardwired beneath the floorboard months back, both intruders were tied up on the porch, bruised and silent. Ben whistled low. "Damn, you weren't kidding." Graham didn't smile. "Call in the team. Have them disappear, these two." Quietly. "You want them gone?" Ben asked. "I want them witnessed," Vivian said. "Let your people question them. Get everything. Who sent them? Who paid? Who's next?" Ben gave a tight nod. "Copy that." He loaded them into the truck. No lights, no plates, just silence swallowing the night. When the truck disappeared down the dirt road, Graham walked back inside. Sophie sat on the couch, knees pulled to her chest. Blankets around her, eyes wide. Vivian sat beside her. "I was scared," Sophie said. Vivian wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "That's okay, sweetheart. You were brave." "I didn't scream," she whispered. "I just watched." Graham knelt in front of her, took her hand. "You did everything right, Bug." She looked up at him. "Why did they come?" Vivian met Graham's eyes. They had to tell her something, not the whole truth, but enough. "Some bad people want something from me," she said gently. "And they think hurting others will help them get it." Sophie's brow furrowed. "That's dumb." Vivian smiled, lips trembling. "Yeah, it is." Sophie thought for a long moment. "Are they going to come again?" Graham answered. "Not while I'm breathing." And for the first time since she arrived, Vivian didn't flinch at that kind of certainty. She welcomed it. She believed it. Later, when Sophie was asleep and the house finally exhaled, Graham sat on the porch beside Vivian. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then she said, "I thought I'd be the one protecting you." He glanced over. "You are." She looked down at her hands. "I used to be powerful, Graham. I had 500 employees, a corner office. I could sign documents that shifted millions with a stroke of a pen." He let her talk. "But tonight I wasn't a CEO. I was just someone who didn't want a child to be afraid." He nodded. "Then you were exactly who you needed to be." Vivian turned to him. Her voice broke slightly. "You should have let me go when you had the chance." "I did," Graham said quietly. "You just came back." She laughed, soft and raw. "So what now?" He looked out over the dark, the stars above stretching like silent witnesses. "Now we stop surviving." She tilted her head. "And start what?" He looked at her. Really looked. And said, "Living." Because something had shifted tonight. Not just the lines of battle, but the center of gravity between two people who had once been strangers on opposite sides of the war. And now they were something else entirely. Not broken, but bonded. By fire. By choice. By the simple, unshakable truth that they had stood together when it mattered most. And that changed everything. "They always say the truth will set you free," Vivian whispered, her fingers trembling as she clasped the mug of lukewarm tea. "But no one ever warns you about the fire it lights on the way out." She stood behind the podium in the small wood-paneled courtroom. Sunlight leaked in through tall windows, catching dust motes in the air like confetti before a battle. Ben leaned close and adjusted the mic for her. "You sure about this?" he murmured. Vivian nodded. "No, but I'm done being quiet." In the gallery sat Graham and Sophie. She clutched her father's hand, her other one wrapped around her sketch pad. In a back corner, 3 journalists waited with pens like daggers, and just behind them a man in a gray suit took notes with too much interest and too little blinking. Graham's jaw clenched. That was Holloway's man. But none of it mattered now, because she was going to speak. Vivian's voice rang clear despite the crack at the edge. "My name is Vivian Cross. I was CEO of Evermore Technologies until 3 months ago. On the record, I resigned. Off the record." She looked down. "Breathe." "I was forced out for refusing to sign a series of acquisitions I believed were unethical, possibly illegal." The courtroom shifted. Chairs creaked. Eyes narrowed. "I didn't blow the whistle then because I was scared. Not of losing my job, but of being erased. Discredited. Silenced." She took another breath. "But then I met a little girl who reminded me what it means to tell the truth even when your voice shakes." Vivian turned toward Sophie and the little girl smiled, brave, wide-eyed believing. "So, today, I testify not just for myself, but for every employee who saw the warnings and stayed quiet, for the engineers who vanished after asking too many questions, and for the janitor who saved my life and reminded me who I used to be." A soft gasp moved through the room. Graham looked down. His throat tightened. Ben gave the faintest nod. Vivian continued. "On the night I fled the city, I took with me an encrypted drive containing internal memos, black-budget contracts, and off-the-record financials. The contents reveal offshore accounts, bribery schemes, and targeted surveillance of private citizens for profit." One of the journalists straightened. Another began recording on her phone. "I know coming forward puts me in danger. It already has. But what's more dangerous is letting men like Holloway rewrite the truth." Vivian looked directly at the judge. "I am ready to submit the evidence and testify under oath." She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small silver USB drive, and placed it gently on the stand. The entire room held its breath, until the judge spoke, voice low and steady. "Ms. Cross, you understand that by doing this you're placing yourself under federal protection and in the crosshairs of one of the most powerful men in the country." Vivian nodded. "I've lived in fear long enough." The judge gave a slow, respectful nod. Then let the record show. The silence ends today. Outside the courthouse, the sky broke open. A light drizzle coated the steps where reporters were already gathering. Graham held an umbrella over Vivian as she stepped into the clearing. "You didn't just burn a bridge," he said softly. "You lit the whole damn river." Vivian gave a small smile. "Then maybe something new can grow from the ashes." A black SUV pulled up. Ben stepped out, phone to his ear. "They're processing the drive now," he said. "My team says it's more than enough. Holloway's going to scramble." "Good," Vivian replied. "Let him run. The truth's faster." Ben glanced at Graham. "We need to relocate you two. Temporary witness protection, just until the indictments are locked." Graham's brow furrowed. "Sophie's just starting to feel safe again." "We'll make it feel like a vacation," Ben said, his tone softening. "Cabin up north, lake view, no one around for miles. I'll handle everything." Graham looked at Vivian. "Are you coming with us?" She hesitated, just a breath, then nodded. "Yeah. I think I want to see what peace looks like." That night, they packed light. Sophie tucked her sketchpad into her backpack along with the snow globe Graham had found for her at a gas station 2 towns back. "Do I have to call it witness protection?" she asked him. "No," Graham said. "You can call it a road trip, with extra marshmallows." He smiled. "As many as you want." Vivian watched them from the doorway, her arms crossed heart full in ways she hadn't expected. "They don't teach this part in business school," she said. Graham turned to her. "No, but maybe they should." He paused. "You sure you're ready for this?" Vivian nodded. "For the first time." "I think I am." And in that moment, surrounded by shadows they had turned into light, by risks they had turned into choice, they weren't just escaping anymore. They were beginning. In the distance, Holloway sat in a dimly lit boardroom, a glass of whiskey untouched before him. A young man entered with a folder. "It's confirmed," he said. She gave them the drive. Holloway didn't speak. The man continued. "They're issuing warrants in the morning. We're burning." Holloway raised his eyes. Then quietly, "Then we fight fire." With silence. And the room went dark. The courtroom was quiet again. The gavel had dropped. The chains had clinked. The doors had closed behind the men in suits and sins. But for Vivian, silence didn't mean peace. She stood on the courthouse steps alone, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the pavement, the kind that made you feel small in a world too big to understand. Reporters yelled her name behind the barricades, snapping photos of the fallen CEO turned whistleblower. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She had said what she came to say. "I didn't come to clear my name. I came to give theirs back." Graham hadn't spoken to her since the trial. He'd sat in the back, arms folded, unreadable. When the verdict landed, he'd simply nodded once and left. And now she wasn't sure where to go. The escort, waiting to take her back to the temporary safe house, idled at the curb. But her heart wasn't in that car. She walked instead. Past the courthouse, past the statues of justice and liberty. Past the park where Sophie had once chased a red balloon. Her heels clicked against the sidewalk, but each step felt heavier. She wasn't afraid anymore. Just untethered. That night, as the wind rustled the blinds of her quiet apartment, she noticed something odd wedged beneath the door. It was a letter, handwritten, folded, twice sealed with a small sticker of a purple star. She froze. Her fingers trembled as she peeled it open, recognizing the looping, childlike handwriting before she even read the first word. "Dear Miss Vivian, Dad says letters help when words get stuck, so I wrote you one. At first I thought you were like the people in the stories Dad doesn't want me to read, the ones who smile but hide sharp things in their hands. But you weren't. You cried like my bird did when it hit the window, like you forgot how to fly. But now you smile when I draw you. You drink tea like my mom used to, and your hands don't shake when the mail truck comes. That means something. So, I just wanted to say, you don't look hurt anymore. You can come home now, if you want. Love, Sophie. P.S. We saved your seat at the kitchen table." Vivian sat there clutching the paper like it was the last thing holding her together. Her breath hitched, her vision blurred. No news headline, no courtroom victory, no public apology had ever reached her the way those crayon-drawn words did. She folded the letter and held it to her heart, and she knew. It was nearly dusk when she arrived at the school. The air smelled like chalk dust and old memories. A distant lawnmower hummed somewhere out back. The janitor's closet was where she remembered it, tucked at the end of the hall behind the art room with the butterfly murals. She stood there for a long moment, and then she knocked. No answer. She pushed gently. Inside, Graham was crouched near the supply shelf sorting boxes of winter salt. He turned slowly when he heard her. Their eyes met, and for the first time there was no history between them. Only now. She took a careful step forward. "I didn't want to come if I wasn't welcome." Graham said nothing. His hands, rough and weathered, dropped the box. He stood tall and quiet, searching her expression like it was a song he hadn't heard in years. Vivian reached into her coat, pulled out the letter, and held it out. "She wrote to me," she said, voice catching. "Told me I wasn't broken anymore." Graham's gaze flicked to the paper, then back to her. "She's right," he said softly. "You're not." Vivian swallowed. "Neither are you." He let out a breath, one that seemed like it had been trapped in him for 7 years. "I don't know what this is," she continued, "or what we could be, but I don't want to run anymore. I don't want to hide, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just a place at the table." There was a long silence, and then Graham stepped forward. He took the letter from her hands and folded it gently like something sacred. "You're late," he said. Vivian blinked. "What?" He gestured toward the hallway with a half smile. "Sophie's already picking out your favorite cereal. I told her you like blueberries. She said that was acceptable." Vivian laughed, a real sudden laugh that surprised even her. It cracked something open in both of them. "Is this really okay?" she asked, unsure. Graham nodded. "It's not about okay. It's about choice." He paused. Then added, "And I'm choosing not to be angry anymore. I'm choosing now." They stood there, a woman who had lost everything and a man who had nothing left to lose, finding somehow something whole between them. He offered his hand. She took it. Not as the woman who had once worn power like armor, not as the man who had buried 3 names and his own hope, but as 2 people who had been broken who now finally could begin again, together. The mountains looked different in the morning. Maybe it was the way the fog lifted like a veil, or the way the sunrise painted the peaks in gold and soft lavender. But to Graham, they looked less like a barrier and more like a beginning. Their new home sat at the edge of a quiet slope near the tree line. Not grand, not modern, but solid, honest, with a porch that creaked and a roof Graham had patched with his own hands, the kind of place where peace didn't shout, it just breathed. Inside the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and coffee. Sophie sat at the little round table, her legs swinging a pencil tucked behind one ear as she colored on thick paper. At her feet, a golden retriever pup dozed, its belly rising and falling in sync with hers. Vivian stood by the window barefoot, wrapped in a cardigan too big for her shoulders. In her hands, a steaming mug. In her eyes, something new, something that hadn't lived there before. Stillness, and the quiet bravery of joy. Graham entered from the garage, wiping oil from his hands. He glanced at the tools, the freshly built shelves, the half-assembled woodworking bench he'd been meaning to finish. But today he wasn't in a rush. He paused in the doorway and simply watched them. 2 people who a few months ago had only been names and memories and pain. Now they were here. Vivian turned at the sound of his boots and smiled, soft and real. "Garage is coming together," she said, offering his favorite mug without asking. "You going to finally build that bench you keep talking about?" He took the mug, brushing her hand gently as he did. "Maybe. I was thinking of building something smaller first." She raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" He sipped his coffee. "A music box. For Sophie. One that plays that tune she keeps humming. I think it was your lullaby." Vivian's breath caught. "My mother used to sing it to me. I didn't even realize I was humming it." "You hum it every morning," he said. And she picked it up like it was always hers. Vivian turned to look at Sophie. The girl was bent over her drawing, now tongue between her teeth in concentration. "She's happy," Vivian whispered. "She's safe," Graham added. Vivian looked back at him. "So am I." There was a beat of silence. Then Graham set down the mug and stepped closer. He reached into his back pocket and unfolded something carefully, an envelope. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said, handing it over. Vivian opened it. Inside was a newspaper clipping. Former CEO's whistleblowing sparks national reform in defense contracting. Her photo was there, but not the old one. Not the corporate press image with the cold smile and flawless lighting. No, this one was from the day of her testimony. No makeup, no armor, just eyes full of fire and a spine of steel. "They got it right," Graham said. Vivian traced the headline with her thumb. "I didn't think I'd care." "But you do," he said. She nodded, then folded it gently like something fragile and earned. Sophie suddenly burst out, holding up her drawing. "Look." She'd drawn 3 stick figures, one tall man with a beard, one woman with bright yellow hair, and one girl with a giant heart above her head. The words underneath written in big, blocky letters, "My family." Vivian crouched to meet Sophie's eyes. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Sophie beamed. "It's going on the fridge. Forever." Graham chuckled. "That's about as official as it gets around here." Vivian stood looking at the girl, then at him. "I spent years thinking I had no place left," she said. "But now, this isn't hiding. This is home." Graham reached for her hand. "And you're not running anymore. That changes everything." They stepped outside, mugs in hand, watching Sophie chase the dog across the frost-kissed grass. The laughter echoed through the trees, bright and clean. A distant radio crackled from the workshop window. In national news, the largest defense contractor scandal in over a decade has come to a close with multiple arrests and sweeping reforms thanks to one woman's courage to speak when it mattered most. Graham reached through the window and turned it off. "That chapter's closed," he said. Vivian leaned into him. "What about this one?" He looked down at her. "Only just begun." Then, softly, "You still want to stay." She met his eyes without hesitation. "I've never wanted to be anywhere else." The wind picked up gently, rustling the trees. Graham pulled her close, his voice low against her temple. "Then let's build something new, from nothing but truth." And there, on a porch worn by time and made sacred by forgiveness, they stood. Not as saviors, not as victims, but as people who had survived the fire, the lies, and the silence, and somehow still chose love. And so, sometimes the most unexpected knock on our door isn't just someone seeking shelter. It's fate offering us a second chance, a chance to forgive, to heal, to begin again, not as who we were, but as who we choose to become. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from tonight, and what part of this story touched your heart the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales just like this. Stories of broken things made whole again, of quiet courage, redemption, and love. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying till the end. Until next time, take care of your story, because someone out there might just need to hear it.